want to explain again this series. We're talking about the tabernacle. And it seems like a different world because it was a different world. And you have humanity that just went off the rails. And we have the story. We have the story about personal sin. That's Adam and Eve. You have the story about kind of relational sin. Cain murdering Abel. You have this story of pervasive sin, which is all the world, and God's response was with the flood. And then you have this story of complete and outright rebellion, which is the Tower of Babel. And God's response was to start a relationship with a family. And in Genesis 12, he calls Noah. Sorry, that was the last story. He calls Abraham. And it's been a long week. He calls Abraham, and he tells Abraham, I will make you a great nation, and through you I will bless all people. And so he took this family, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and we get to Joseph. And Joseph goes to Egypt, and there's 400 years of Egypt. It started out great. Somewhere went south. And we don't know the exact process. We don't even know exactly where they were. This is a really deep dive. The best we can figure is up in the northeast part of Egypt, up by the delta. We think that's where the Israelites may have lived, and they were stuck up there because if the Hittites decided to come down and attack Egypt, well, they would get it first. They were kind of a buffer. It's 400 years of slavery, and even though it became slaves in those 400 years, and in the middle of that, they grew. This family had become a nation. But in that 400 years, they were immersed in the ways of Egypt and Egypt's gods. And last week, we looked at the grand temples of Egypt. And somewhere in there, they had forgotten about their God. And all of a sudden, in the Exodus, they were led out. And they saw that their God was more powerful than Egypt's God. But they just knew that. They didn't know about their God. They didn't know who this God was. And so this is God's larger attempt to teach them who he was. And you think, well, how long does it take? And my answer to this, how long has it taken for most of us? Sometimes be taught the same lesson over and over and over and over again. And even though they were slaves, they lived in the most powerful and rich kingdom on earth. Think about it. When the Jews were in Egypt, the pyramids were already up. And if you go to Egypt and look at the pyramids, you are seeing the exact same thing that the Jews did when they left. Material things were commonplace. But now they were a community on the move, in the desert. Homes were now tents, even if one tent was for God. But why a tent? Everyone knew at the time that gods lived in temples. And if they didn't live in temples, they lived on the top of the mountain, which is why I have this trail coming down the mountain behind me. Not us going up, the trail's coming down. These ideas are not just overthrown in an instant. Already, Israel's God is down from the mountain and living with them. So we talked about last week. Headway is already being made. And now we move a little further. It says Exodus 38. I'm going to pull equally from Exodus 37 and Exodus 38. Again, not earth-shaking verses. I'm just describing the materials used in the tabernacle. They made the bronze basin and its bronze stand from the mirrors of the women who served at the entrance to the tent of the meeting. The bases for the posts were bronze. The hooks and bands on the posts were silver, and their tops were overlaid with silver. So all the posts of the courtyard had silver bands. Now I'm at 38. Sorry, back to chapter 37. Bezalel made the ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits long, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high. He overlaid it with pure gold, both inside and out, and made a gold molding around it. But he made the atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long, and a cubit and a half wide. Why are we getting descriptions of how things are made? Well, I'm actually going in a direction. I want to talk about the outer courtyard first. This is the area. I want you to imagine we really have, and we're coming up into Memorial Day here, we have a community of campers. Now, I know I've been in places like Custer State Park in South Dakota, High Country Guest Ranch, where our daughter worked for 2 years, and seen some of the beautiful places that campers could go and back into, little mountain streams running by, maybe in the middle of woods. I've seen Wade and Mary Jane post pictures of North Carolina, some beautiful little camp spot in the woods up in the Blue Ridge, and that's beautiful. And I said, wow, that's nice. I get that. And then sometimes I'm driving by an interstate, and you know those little lakes they dig out to make the exit ramps on the interstate? And here in the middle of this wide open spot with a warehouse behind it is a little campground where people pull off around a lake that they dug with the interstate. And I look at that and I'm going, what on earth are people doing? Why do I want to sit between a warehouse and a highway? I don't understand. This is a community of campers. They would stay in an area for weeks, perhaps months, maybe even a few cases, years, and then move on. Imagine a sea of tents, thousands of tents, and this is where they lived. Their movement in many ways matched the seasons. I mean, they had herds to take care of. That's where they got food. So they had to match. The wet season, they might be able to go out a little bit. And in the dry season, they had to stay close to an oasis. And they'd move where there was pasture. There was water to feed their cattle. There'd be grass or plants to graze on. And that was not always easy to find. And in the middle of the camp, imagine you're up on a hill and you're looking at this sea of campers, and in the middle of all these tents is this open rectangle. And in the midst of all this linen, you catch a little glint in the sun. You saw a bronze square and a bronze circle, and it would really sparkle. And interspersed with all the linen on this rectangle, you'd see the sun reflect off silver that held the linen to mark the difference between the tabernacle and the camp. Sure, you saw the fabric, but you'd see the glistening of silver. And maybe if you look at the base, you saw more bronze. That's what they stuck the poles in. You had bronze at the base. You had all these valuable materials. Imagine you were a person from the community. You're still trying to get to know this God. All you see is linen, and here's this thing in the middle. And when you went to the thing in the middle, that's where the valuable stuff was. The bronze, the silver. And in a world, that made a difference. Just back the first week of March, Adam and I flew out to Las Vegas. And we didn't stay in Las Vegas. We just drove through Las Vegas. We went up to Mesquite, Nevada, and then out to St. George, Utah. And we get outside of Utah a little bit, outside of St. George. Up on top, St. George is a community that's built on top and on bottom. So there's a road that goes through the low part of town and a road that goes up on the rim. Up on the rim, there's red rocks that stick up everywhere. But down low, there's no color. The dirt is kind of grayish brown. The sagebrush is kind of gray. There's no green trees anywhere. There's no green grass. You have a rock yard. If you have a yard that's green, it's AstroTurf. And there's no color. where they're going to is largely a world of no color. And in the midst of this place of no color, there was this place of sparkle that would catch your eye. And it was in the middle of this rectangle. The little silver, the big bronze things. Let me talk about the two bronze things. The one is the bronze altar. Leviticus 6:13, it says the fire on the altar was to be kept burning at all times. This was the place they would come, and to atone for their sins, they would sacrifice the animal, and it would be consumed. The fat of the animal would be consumed up on that altar. And so sometimes there'd be, if you've ever, you know the difference between cooking a really lean steak on your grill and a T-bone with well marbled with fat. Well, that T-bone will flame up and fire up. And that would catch your attention. In Revelation chapter 8, it mentions that altar again. Except in Revelation 8, it adds another element to the altar. That altar, the smoke coming from the altar, was supposed to symbolize the prayers of the saints going up before God. The symbolism, if you looked at it, was that this God, unlike the stone gods in Egypt, was always aware and always listening and cares deep for his people. Next to it was a bronze basin. And that was for the priests before they would go into the holy place to atone for the sins of the people. They would have to stop at the basin and wash their hands and wash their feet. The symbolism is you don't get to go into the presence of God unless you've been very, very careful and aware of your own life. Now, some of us remember the day that if you went to church on Sunday, you put your suit on and you put your best dress on. And if on the way, if you had to change a tire because you had a flat, and you took your jacket off, and then changing your tire, you got your nice shirt all smudgy. Oh, no way I'm going to church. You just missed that Sunday. You had to turn around and go home because my shirt's dirty. I am not saying I want to return to that day. Don't catch me wrong at all. Let me also say that in some ways, culturally, we may have lost a little something. We threw out the bathwater, which is always good, but a little bit of the baby got with it. We're not as aware of our own selves. And sometimes we very casually, very sloppily, very unthinkingly go before the presence of God. We live our lives in a way that's not reflective at all. That permeates everything. I've been to an airport recently. I've seen what people wear when they get on a plane. They're not even aware they're in public. I've been other places. I've been to restaurants and seen what they wear inside. No. But the priest would also, when they would go to this basin and go to clean, when they would kneel over, go over, one thing they'd have to do when you would go over this basin is you'd see your own reflection. They were forced to see themselves. And it's always good to see yourself a little bit. And maybe even see yourself as maybe God sees you. And aware of our own need. And the materials of bronze, it reflected there's something more of importance going on here in the community. But then after going in, the next place would be inside the holy place. This is the larger tent that housed the Holy of Holies. And when you would step in there, there was two pieces of furniture. The first one you'd see is the golden lampstand. We've moved from bronze and silver. Now we've moved on to gold. It was in the shape of an almond tree. There was leaves inside of how it was made, stood for God's life-giving power. It was supposed to remind them of the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, and remind them that God is really the source of all life. And it was a permanent reminder that regardless of what's going on, that God gives us real life. That verse in Genesis chapter 2. And God breathed into man's nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. That is not a medical description of divine CPR. It simply means that we really don't live until we have God living inside of us. And it's a reminder. The Hebrew root word for an almond tree is shaked, which also means to hasten, and a reminder that Israel's God is quick to fulfill His promises. And so there's an awareness. We've gone from bronze to silver. We've gone into this new place. Now we see this golden lampstand that's giving light to everything, and especially giving light to the other side of the tent, where there was a table made of wood, but gold plated, overlaid with gold, a thin layer. And on it was what they called the table of shewbread. Let me explain that. It was these unleavened bread circular cakes that they would make. And they would place it a stack of six and a stack of six to represent the 12 tribes. And it would sit there for a week, and then before the Sabbath the next week, the priest would take that off. That's what they would eat. And they'd put the new bread on the table where it would sit for a week. There's a simple, the imagery for them was clear. This described the daily provision that God has for all of us. Early on, when they were still wandering, this bread was made from manna in the desert. God gave them just enough for that day. As you know, God told them, go out and get what you need. Don't go up and get whole jars of it. It'll go bad. Just take enough for the day. This is God's daily provision. And God's daily provision is so valuable, we're going to put it on gold. The other thing it represented is, they called this the bread of presence. The daily presence of God. The daily presence. God is not in a temple that I go see on Thursday at 2 p.m. The presence of God that's in the middle of the camp every day. The presence of God that should be in the middle of my life every day. It is so valuable, we're only going to put it on a table made of gold. And by the way, this should sound very, very familiar to us. In the New Testament, in Matthew, when Jesus prays, one part of this prayer was, give to us this day our daily bread. And we read that and think, yeah, give me enough food to make it through the day. That is not really what Jesus is getting at there. I want you to have my presence every day. I want you to enjoy my essence of who I am every day. You are more than just what you eat. You are what you worship. You are what lives in the middle of your camp. Finally, we move into the Holy of Holies. And the best idea is, think Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Ark of the Covenant was inside of that. The Ark of the Covenant was literally the central part of life of the Jewish community. It was a box. In the last sermon on this series, we're going to talk about this box. It was made of wood and overlaid again with gold. It's something of immense value. We should also remember, if you go back, and this is interesting, and we don't talk about this much anymore, but they would have rings at the base of the Ark of the Covenant. They would slide poles through to carry the Ark, because if you touch the Ark, you died. Well, why would, that's cruel. Well, I think what God is trying to get at his people is, I am completely different than you. I demand something. But there's only one case in all the Old Testament where that happened. Only one. Now, even though you have this box that's just like the table, it's wood, but it's overlaid with gold, then you have the lid. And it says the lid was made of solid gold. It wasn't wood with gold on it. The whole thing was gold. Not plated. When we go back to the Ark of the Covenant, I know I'm getting deep in the weeds. This is Moses, what he said, I saw the throne of God, and he made the Ark of the Covenant. And on top are these two angels you see here. And the angels are outstretched, and they're touching. The wings are touching. In the middle of the touching wings, that big oval or rectangle, on the Day of Atonement, the priest would go into the Holy of Holies. He would sprinkle the blood of the perfect lamb on that lid. It was called the mercy seat, the place of atonement for the sins of the people. And as he did so, he would say, Almighty God, please look at this blood as the blood of your servant Isaac and atone the sins of the people. This is where God met his people in forgiveness. And it is the most valuable thing anywhere in the camp, where forgiveness was offered and where relationship was established. In Revelation chapter 5, we have this wonderful picture. There's a vision of the person, and it says, then I saw the Lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing, and the wording is strange. You can look at it. Amidst the throne. How does one stand amidst a throne? I can stand behind it. I can stand in front of it. I can stand beside it. I suppose if my mom's not in the room, I could climb up and stand on top of it. But how do I stand amidst the throne? Because the whole issue is, who will open the seal? Who is worthy? I looked around and no one was worthy except the Lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing amidst the throne. The throne is this Ark of the Covenant. The Lamb is in between the outstretched wings of these angels. This is where atonement was made for the people. Let me reiterate something. God is teaching people who he is. And this will take some time. And sometimes for us, God works with us, and it takes time. And we live amongst a culture sometimes that says, well, once you become a Christian, if you make any mistake, God's through with you. Goodness gracious. Who parents like that? This is where forgiveness happens. This is where new life begins. This is where people's direction is turned from damaging to healthy, from profane to holy. And this is the place that's made of pure gold. Don't miss the message. The message is, know what is really of value. You live in tents, but where God lives, we're marking out. Where prayers happen is made of bronze. Where personal sacrifice made is bronze. The place that marks off God's home is made of silver. And you go in, the place that lights the room is made of gold. And the place that houses God's presence is made of gold. And where we go to forgiveness and establish relationship is pure gold. Think of the questions the people were asking then. Who dresses our God? Where do we go for the festival? Tell me, where do the temple prostitutes live? No, our God does not demand any of that. God does not demand prostitutes to serve. Our God does not need to be dressed or fed. Our God does not need a party or a festival. Our God demands our lives and our faithfulness. And our God has a greater worth than any of the trappings of life. There's, I think, a lesson here. I'm really, really thankful that we don't have to live in tents anymore. And why I really do respect a lot of you camping people I wonder what on earth is wrong with you sometimes. It took us thousands of years to start to sleep off the ground. And why we go back to sleep on the ground again, I don't get it. I love air conditioning. I don't like sticky, but that's a different thing. We don't live in tents. We have nice things. We enjoy nice things in life. And sometimes I think maybe our issue is we don't mark out our nice things from what's really valuable. If someone were to drop down, some alien were to drop down in the middle and just observe us without us looking and take a look at our lives, what would they think we value? What would they think we hold as more worth than anything else? Do we live like our real worth is from God? Or do we live like real worth lies in something else? The lesson here is God was telling those people, I'm telling you where the real value in life is. Pursue that above anything else.